Welcome back. In the previous two vlogs, we first looked at a brief overview of the history and, well, present state of things in Round Rock, Texas. In the second video, we looked at the effects and impacts of I-35 on Round Rock as it developed and as it may continue to grow into the future. In this video, we're going to examine suburbanization and how it's affecting Round Rock like countless other communities across the nation. When my family moved into our house, we were the only ones in the neighborhood. So it was kind of this hybrid of being in the middle of nowhere, but that middle of nowhere being in the middle of a suburb almost. There were, of course, other lots going up, but at the same time, there were plenty of trees and other things around. So my initial memories were very different, I'd say, than those of a lot of other people growing up in the area. For a number of years, my friends and I would improve on and play in kind of a fort of sorts on the lot next to us that had yet to be cleared and was covered in oak and cedar trees. So it was kind of like having this nice, wild area that we could access while still being very much in a suburb. And I don't think it really occurred to me that we were in a suburb for a very long time. I vaguely remember the first time I saw an aerial map of the neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods and just being boggled at the number of houses and the number of people that were around us. I mean, it's certainly more low density than you'd find in a city, but to a kid, it's hard to comprehend that there are so many other people living their own separate lives in such close proximity to you. It's almost surreal, or at least it was for me. And the neighborhood, I'd say, for the most part, the neighborhood I lived in eventually was fully developed, but there were still fairly open areas nearby, and certainly at the backside of the neighborhood there were open former pastures that had trees and other things in them. I know, having had to chase numerous pets through those areas. But now those trees are rapidly disappearing as more and more people move into the area and more businesses move in to accommodate those people. To give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, let's look back at some of the maps we were looking at in the first video. So we are once again looking at my childhood home right here. And this is the neighborhood I grew up in, this fork-shaped, or tuning fork-shaped thing, I suppose. As you can see, there are still plenty of trees, but they're all well-maintained and in yards. The lot I was talking about was this one right here. For years and years, there was nothing there but brush and trees, and that was where we all played for ages. This land I mentioned in the first video is no longer this way, but it was for a long time, and that's where I mentioned having to chase dogs and, well, pets in general, but dogs particularly. Now this whole area is being developed as a very large nursing home, which does make sense given that this is a hospital, so it is in close proximity, but they have cleared the land and are putting in the nursing home, which has been upsetting apparently, from at least what my mother tells me, to the people who live at the end of the street. They see it as decreasing their property value, and apparently they believe that the area would remain the way it was in perpetuity. However, that has not been the case. Something similar happened a number of years ago on this side of the neighborhood. These buildings were probably not there about 4 to 6 years ago. Similar things can be seen happening all over the area. I believe some of this area will be maintained as parks, but I'm sure in time some of that will be developed. As I move further out, you can see that we just have these spirals that curl in on themselves of neighborhoods. Though there is still a fair amount of open space, I'm sure in the coming years that too will begin to disappear. If we zoom out even further, you can see that this pattern simply continues on and on, though it gets a bit harder to see as we lose resolution. This suburbanization isn't limited to the area around where I grew up, but is even occurring in areas that I, for the longest time, knew simply as farmland and just open spaces. I'd say a fair portion of this just within the past 10 to 20 years was developed. Some of these you can see are larger sections and are likely premium areas and maybe around a golf course or just have inbuilt parklands. It's interesting to me that you can still have these open active fields and farms just miles or even less than a mile in some cases from these large developments. Here they're simply divided by a creek. This large black area is the local AAA team, the Round Rock Express's baseball stadium, the Dell Diamond. This used to be farmland and was hardly developed at all. There were maybe a couple of farmhouses. Back in this area there were baseball fields, and I'm sure those are still there. But since the Dell Diamond was built, and certainly since these residential areas have begun to pop up, businesses have begun to appear and more of this land gets developed. So, is all this suburbanization good or bad? I don't know that that's really my place to say, or that anyone has a definite answer. Ecologically speaking, it's not particularly good for the environment, but it does allow people to live in a way that at least they perceive to be better for them, though I do know that there are studies that show that living in a suburb versus city doesn't really change your happiness. And it certainly has been good for Round Rock, economically at least, increasing the tax base and everything that goes along with that. But historically speaking, we've seen the roots of this, things such as Levittown and similar projects, some made very cheaply, some made to be luxury properties, and they haven't fared well through time. So it's hard to know really what will become of all these properties. If the housing market continues to decline, people could find themselves surrounded by derelict buildings and homes and all the problems that those bring along with them. I know that for me, it's hard to see this happening because I have such fond childhood memories of playing in those open spaces, and I feel like with this ever-increasing suburbanization, we're losing those open spaces. But that's purely an emotional call. So I don't know. I don't think there is any one answer. Is it right? Is it wrong? It may not be. I certainly can't wait to see what happens in the future, good or bad. I suppose that goes back to Jane Jacobs' quote that I don't mind getting old, you get to see what happened. So I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. May future generations judge us. So that was a little bleak again, I suppose. So it's time for another entertaining, or at least interesting to me, story about Round Rock. Downtown Round Rock, or at least traditional downtown Round Rock, before the highway, was seen to an interesting shootout during the 19th century, in which a division of the Texas Rangers caught up with and eventually killed the train robber Sam Bass. There's a whole road named after Sam Bass. I think it's strange that we name it after a train robber. But that's not really what I find fascinating about the story. What I find fascinating is that there was a young boy who was at the shootout near the Texas Ranger who supposedly made the killing shot, named Soapy Smith. He would later go on to be a con man and a gangster working through Colorado and Alaska during the gold rushes and amassing a fortune until he too was shot. I realized I tried to put a lighthearted note at the end of a video by describing two killings. But they were both gangsters, so there's that. See you next time!